Some of our fondest memories come from our childhoods. And Thanksgiving is one of those holidays that often evokes those memories from the depths of our minds. That was one of those holidays that I remember fondly that my family hosted when my brother Thomas and I were much, much younger. We had the biggest dining room in the family. I think that's the reason they all came to our place. Our grandparents, our aunt and uncle, and cousins. And as in many different families, each family would bring something to share with the meal. But for us, this would include traditional Lithuanian dishes like beet soup, mushroom salad, and a potato kugel, a dish that Lithuanians share with Ashkenazi Jews. The four of us kids would play together like there was no tomorrow. As a family of World War II refugees, the American Thanksgiving story wasn't included in our family celebrations. My grandparents as adults and parents as children escaped the communist occupation of Lithuania by Soviet Russia at the end of World War II. We would say a prayer of thanks for the bounty that we received as a family, but also pray for those who were facing food insecurity and those who are shelter challenged. And all of our prayers always included prayers for those imprisoned in the Soviet Gulag in faraway Siberia, where many of our relatives were deported to. The Unitarian tradition has its own Thanksgiving story, and so this is my cue for the musicians. The Unitarian poet Lydia Maria Child, 1802 to 1880, wrote a poem called The New England Boy Song about Thanksgiving Day. You have probably heard it, maybe even know it, and it goes something like this.
Over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh in the rain and drifting snow. Over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. Yes, and do, and yes. Thank you.
All right.
That is one of our Unitarian contributions to American society and history and culture. Mariah, she used her middle name, found inspiration for her poem in her idyllic New England childhood memories of Thanksgiving at her grandparents' house. She was one of the first American women who earned a living as a professional author. She wrote novels, tracts, and many children's poems and stories. She advocated for the abolition of slavery, voting rights for women, and documented the history of Native Americans in New England. So a handful of years ago, when I was serving another UUA congregation, another Unitarian Universalist congregation, that was a dual congregation with the United Church of Christ, K-Love, the evangelical music station, was holding a contest. They were looking for an American Thanksgiving song. I knew the answer to this question. So I submitted Mariah's Over the Hills and Through the Woods with brief background information about her. Guess what? My submission was rejected. For some reason, the evangelicals didn't care for a progressive Unitarian Christian and social justice activist who wrote the classic American Thanksgiving carol. Mariah's song, if you noticed, makes no mention of the traditional American story, the traditional American Thanksgiving story. Thanksgiving, in her lifetime, was a New England religious holiday, a sincere, celebratory autumn harvest festival. And this holiday could take on special meaning in some years. For example, the United States Continental Congress proclaimed a national Thanksgiving for the newly adopted United States Constitution with its Bill of Rights. President James Madison later proclaimed Thanksgiving for the end of the War of 1812, and after him, president after president followed suit. But not everyone was happy with the Thanksgiving holiday. People like Thomas Jefferson opposed the government declaring a religious holiday because of the separation of church and state. We also need to remember that Jefferson was an Episcopalian who attended a Unitarian church, who also enslaved 700 people in his lifetime and raped some of them. The truth about our presidents is sometimes important to hear. Other people were upset by parades and political speeches that were being given on a religious holiday. And Southerners, they despised this New England abolitionist tradition. And they said that it interfered with Christmas. I think we hear some of those complaints today. Apparently, Thanksgiving was too woke for the Southerners. During the Civil War in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln made Thanksgiving a national holiday to celebrate American unity. That was the purpose of his declaration. Again, there was no mention of the Mayflower, no Pilgrims, no Plymouth Rock, no Native Americans, and no first Thanksgiving. So, there's the saying, behind every great man is a great woman. Lincoln didn't come up with the idea himself. Sarah Hale was the long-term editor of the Goody Ladies book, which was the most widely read magazine of the day. And every November, she focused on rural New England Thanksgiving traditions with all their pleasantries and quaintnesses and nicenesses. A typical Thanksgiving menu in her day consisted of roasted turkey, gravy and savory stuffing, chicken pie, pumpkin pie, pickles, cakes, and preserves with ginger beer, I want some this year, currant wine, and cider to drink, hard cider to drink. Sarah, year after year after year, proposed Thanksgiving as a patriotic holiday to unify fractured American society. We were fractured back then over the abolition of slavery. She appealed to successive presidents, and she succeeded with President Lincoln. Her sentiments about American unity have sound resonance today. Our country is once again divided over human rights and civil decency for our fellow American minority populations. The attacks on Latinx and transgender communities are particularly bigoted, vicious, and anti-Christian in our own age. So where does this American first Thanksgiving come from? The first claim appears in 1841. Unitarian minister, again another Unitarian, Alexander Young, publishes a letter from Edward Winslow, who was one of the leaders of the Mayflower Pilgrims. The Mayflower Pilgrims came to America to escape religious persecution back home in England. In the letter, Winslow describes the 1621 harvest that took place with the Wampanoag and the English colonists at Patuxet, as in Squanto's story. And here's a quote from his letter. Many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among them their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor and upon the captain and others. End quote. Deer was served at the first Thanksgiving. For the duration of their lives, the Mayflower Pilgrims, the Wampanoag Native Americans, and Squanto too, managed to live as good neighbors in relative peace. Can we uphold that covenant of peace this Thanksgiving in our United States? Winslow's letter resurfaced around the turn of the 20th century. waves of immigrants were coming to the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century. Like today, many were fleeing harsh economic conditions back home or oppressive governments. Unfortunately, this resulted in waves of anti-immigrant xenophobia in our own country, not unlike what we're experiencing, orchestrated by our government today. So school curricula were created to help, quote, Americanize or assimilate the newcomers with a shared cultural heritage. So it's at this time that the myth of the first Thanksgiving was created. And we know all the trappings of that common Thanksgiving story. It features the colonial harvest with native Indians and immigrant pilgrims breaking bread together in peace. For Thanksgiving, the United States created a story of its origins. Oppressed people from faraway lands coming to America for her bounty. And children, especially immigrant children, could share the story and easily bring it home to their families and tell their families about it. So this Thanksgiving, I would like to invoke the words of Abraham Lincoln from his Thanksgiving Declaration. To heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it as soon as it may be consistent with its divine purposes, to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union. The Pilgrim Wampanoag Peace from 1621 and President Lincoln's sentiments from 1863 are just as applicable today in our United States of 2025. We seek to create a new nation created out of many peoples coming together, Native Americans, European colonizers, liberated descendants of enslaved Africans, and many new waves of immigrants coming to America to share in her bounty. Let us give thanks.